Hey, and welcome to the first edition of Tipsy Talks, where we may or may not be tipsy. My name is Jesse, and this is
Corinne.
And we're going to talk to you today about power imbalances in heterosexual relationships. So, we're going to start with this concept of power and our understanding of masculinity in our society, and how this understanding of masculinity also equates with power in many of our communities. This understanding of masculinity shapes the schemas and scripts of our intimate and romantic relationships. Knudsen and Martin and Mahoney point out that couples will fall into unequal relationship patterns without their conscious awareness. And Shaw and Lee. So, the understanding of power is essentially masculine in our society, and this is prevalent in so many of our communities. And this understanding shapes these schemas and scripts of our intimate and romantic relationships. Knudsen, Martin, and Mahoney point out that couples will fall into unconscious, unequal relationship patterns, and Shaw and Lee also emphasize this in women's voices and feminist visions.
So, power, which is the ability to influence a relationship towards one's goals, interests, and well being, and responsibility, which is having to make sure that day to day tasks are maintained and the family well being are being completed, are different and gendered.
Yeah, so Knudsen and Mahoney specifically indicate that power is something that we see on the masculine side of relationships, and then responsibility is actually something that we see more on the feminine side of relationships. We're going to explore these power imbalances in 4 ways. First, we're going to talk about the initiation of romantic relationships. Then we're going to talk about sex. Then we're going to talk about economics. And lastly, we're going to touch on egalitarian relationships and what prospects for those look like under the relationship schemas that we currently ascribe to.
So, topic 1, initiation.
Did we do that at the same time?
Yeah, we did.
Okay.
Good job. Good job. So, initiation involves how men start this process of defining the relationship according to air. Scripts tend to be stronger at the outset of a relationship and during non-romantic relationships. The initiation phase features power imbalances that are a result of the perception of a shortage of quality men.
So, all in all, the initiation is really So the initiation stage is a really important part of relationships, because if no one initiates them, then there are no relationships, and then there are no babies, and then humans die off. So what's important about the initiation stage is that putting that role on men really gives them a lot of power, especially in communities where that perception of the shortage of quality men exists. And this is something that, according to the research done by McLellan, is especially prominent in African American and Latinx communities. So in these communities, the idea that there are not a lot of men, or in other words, a good man is hard to find, actually give men a lot of power with initiation. And we'll kind of explore how this contributes to power imbalances later inside this video. But at the initiation stage, it is essentially the impetus of the man to decide whether or not a romantic relationship is going to happen between him and a woman. And so McLellan and Ayer also talk about how this allows men to have a lot of power in the partner assessment phase. And so in their research, they find that men spend much more time actually doing partner assessment. So that's if I know Corinne, and I know like mutual friends of her, and I want to get to know Corinne better, I can talk to more people about Corinne and the type of person that she is, and I can do kind of assessments far off to kind of scope her out as a potential partner. And that's something that they see happen a lot more with men in these communities. Let's talk about sex, baby.
I guess, but that's
I don't know any more of that song. Yeah. So, when it comes to sex, men are viewed as the initiators of sexual contact in predominant relationship schemas.
Women are mostly viewed as pacemakers of sexual intimacy in relationships, otherwise known as gatekeepers.
So essentially, that relationship schema says that the script for sex is going to go a little bit like this. Hey, Corinne, you want to do it? Okay.
Gatekeeper.
But what we see in the research is that women kind of give passes on infidelity to men because they believe they are dependent on the economic provisions of men. And we're going to get a little bit into money later, but this creates a power imbalance where men can actually have multiple sexual partners, and this is an expectation of them because of their ability to provide financially.
Women, however, can perform all of the responsibilities that they are told will lead them to keeping their man, and are still subject to lose him if he decides that he doesn't have enough women in his life.
And this has major health implications for women, especially women of color. So multiple sexual partners and the expectation of infidelity in these heterosexual relationships are related to the prevalence of HIV and AIDS in these communities. And so what's really important here for a lot of researchers is that this idea that a man does not have to be faithful if he is providing for you is actually bad for women in these communities, because it's possible that they are going to be more subject to HIV, AIDS, and other STIs because of the power imbalances in these relationships. And that is not cool.
I don't like it.
She doesn't like it. All right, now it's time to talk about money. So, our normal relationship schemas typically classify men as the primary breadwinners. And so, while this is a concept that is more prevalent in households, when it comes to the way it's diffused into just dating relationships, it's this idea where a man should be able to provide for the woman that he's dating, whether it's like gifts or favors that involve money, just being able to provide in that way.
Women, on the other hand, are expected to be dependent on men for money and therefore see their economic independence to men. And McKellen finds that this dependency relationship is correlated with this understanding that men are providers for households and within the relationship. One more point, when a woman is completely financially dependent on a man, the man could use that power to gain sex.
And so some of the research that we've seen indicates that women understand that they can use sexuality as a form of currency in exchange for material possessions or for financial provisions from a man. So this idea of money and financial, the ability to provide financially, is actually super, super important to the crux of power imbalances in relationships. Arguments about financial provisions are extremely important in these relationships, because when a man is seen as unable to provide, or essentially with less economic agency than a woman, it really challenges this idea of masculinity, because in a lot of relationships, power is directly related to your ability to control money and resources in that relationship. So, arguments that revolve around money in relationships are actually the sites of most of the defenses that men put up for their masculinity. So in a lot of situations, you can have men and women having fights over money, and then once the idea or any idea that challenges the man's ability to provide is mentioned, it might evoke a sort of reaction that tries to protect this idea of the masculinity of the man in the relationship. So McClellan argues that this is kind of what predicts whether physical abuse or emotional abuse will happen in these relationships as a result of arguments that revolve around money. And so, just a really quick note on physicality and abuse. In a lot of these instances, the abuse that we see in relationships is actually a demonstration of masculinity as power. So the idea that the man has power over the femininity of the women and has to show that power somehow is what we see, and the abuse that results in these relationships is actually a demonstration of that masculinity being challenged and it needing to be reasserted in some way, shape, or form. And that reassertion of masculinity, or quite literally that reassertion of power, is usually violent and usually involves negative impacts on women. Okay, so back to the cool stuff. We're going to talk about egalitarian relationships and how they differ. So, Knudsen and Mahoney, three really good ways to categorize relationships. You have traditional relationships, and in these traditional relationships, the partners consciously organize their family life around gender. So traditional gender roles are very overt. You can see them, you can check them out, and they stand by those gender roles and affirm them. The second type of relationship is called gender legacy. And so with gender legacy relationships, these partners tend to speak in terms of equality, gender equality, and egalitarianism. They are consciously proponents of equal sharing of responsibilities, domestic responsibilities, family responsibilities, and work responsibilities in their relationships, but their preferences for work, their division of labor, and their long-term day-to-day operations of their relationships actually reflect gender roles, and they seem to be, in a sense, guided by traditional gender roles. So you can still measure the latent power structures in the day-to-day division of labor in those relationships. Now, the third and final category that Knudsen presents is the post-gender relationship. And so this is a conscious rejection of gender roles and the constructions of the division of labor and interaction between partners that are based on gender. So these relationships work to create patterns that are completely based on mutual agreements that are not associated with gender. So we're going to talk about how these post-gender relationships actually come into play. So the biggest argument about these is that there isn't just a natural evolution into an equal partnership. These just can't happen. There have to be what Knudsen calls stimuluses for changes, and there are 3 stimulus for change, and we are going to identify them here.
So the 3 stimulus for change. First one is an awareness of gender power issues. So this is just the simple acknowledgement that gender struggles are real, that gender differences are real, and both parties are working actively to counter that.
Yes.
The second stimulus for change is that both partners express a strong commitment to both family and work participation. So for example, if one partner is out of work, then it might be prudent for the couple to take on stronger family roles. And lastly, the third stimulus for change is situational pressures, meaning changes in circumstances. And these can spark a reorganization in family life.
For example, if someone who typically didn't live in the family moves in, or if there is a major economic shift in a relationship, for example, someone loses a job, this is going to call for some sort of pressure. A personal anecdote for me was that when my mom moved away to go to college, my dad had to take on a lot more of the at-home family work for me and my sisters, and we all chipped in more to get involved in making sure that all the stuff that my mom did when she moved in or when she lived with us was stuff that was still getting done when she didn't live with us anymore. Okay, so in addition to the three stimulus for change in heterosexual relationships, Knudsen also presents three change processes. So these are the actual things that we see happen that create these gender neutral relationships. So the first change process is active negotiation about family life. So this is a negotiation that is a constant communication between the partners that reorganizes the life of the family to address the power imbalances and the division of labor of domestic work. These are going to be communicated either prior to entering a serious relationship or during the process of entering a serious relationship, and these are going to be equal negotiations that try to answer the needs of both partners in the relationship. The second change process is challenging gender entitlement. So this is very closely related to the awareness of gender power differences. So the man and the female in the relationship are going to understand that there are going to probably be instances where male privilege presents itself in the relationship, and male privilege has to be challenged. By the man, it has to be checked, and by the woman, it has to be called out as well. And so that active process is also part of the creation of the post-gender relationship. And the final change process is the development of new competencies. So this process is the learning slash unlearning of social conditioning, whereas a man is probably not socialized into having strong interpersonal and listening skills. They develop those competencies in the relationship, and in women who are less likely to be socialized into assertive speaking and manual labor are going to learn to do that sort of work more so in their relationship as well. So these three change processes are part of the recommendations that Knudsen makes and how to change a relationship from a gender legacy or a traditional relationship to a post-gender relationship, or to simply decrease the severity of power imbalances in gender relationships. Okay, so that's it. That's everything. We've done a lot. We talked about a lot of stuff. We talked about the gendered power imbalances with respect to initiation of relationships, sex, money, and we also talked about how we transition ourselves from these gendered power imbalances to post-gender or gender equal relationships. So I hope you've learned something. Great job, Corinne. High five.
Yeah, we did it.
Do you feel like we had a equal partner relationship thing?
Yeah.
Cool. And there you go.
Boom. It worked.
It worked. Yeah.
Wow.